Good evening.
So both of us probably feel like we do.
Thank you, Torsten. I appreciate it. Thank you. Good work. Get people clapping. It's good stuff. You get an A in class, okay? Welcome, everybody. Good evening. My name is Matt Bell. For those of you who haven't met before, I'm a professor in the English department and the director of the World Building Initiative here at ASU. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our first workshop, or last workshop of the fall semester. Check my notes. Resistance and Speculative Fiction Beyond. Tonight we'll have presentations from two members of our ASU Humanities community. After we'll have time for conversation and for questions from the audience, including for people who are online if you're joining us on ASU Live. Before we begin, as always, I just want to thank our partners at ASU, including the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Department of English, the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing, and the Humanities Institute. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's world builders, Jenna Hanchey and Tanvir Ahmed. I'm apparently going to introduce them in opposite order. Tanvir Ahmed is an assistant professor of history at Arizona State University. He works on rebellion, thaumaturgy. I'm so glad to get to say thaumaturgy at an event. This feels really good. And historiography among Muslims with expertise in Afghan and Mongol history. In this capacity, he has authored various scholarly articles, public-facing essays, and translations. As a storyteller, he has written several works of short fiction with pieces included in Locus Magazine's recommended reading list and the year's best fantasy. His essay on Orientalism in the Anglophone fantasy market, one of my favorite pieces of his writing, was long listed. What's that?
Sequel coming soon.
Sequel coming soon. Oh, so good. Was long listed for the British Science Fiction Association's annual award and included in the Ancillary Review of Books list of notable criticism. His debut novella, The Night Sweeps the Mountains Away, is scheduled for publication in February 2026 by Dancing Star Press. Jenna Hanchey is Associate Professor of Rhetoric and Critical Cultural Studies at Arizona State University. Her first book, The Center Cannot Hold, Decolonial Possibility in the Collapse of a Tanzanian NGO, is published with Duke University Press. Her current book project, Decolonial Dreamwork, African Futurism and Imagination Beyond Development, we'll hear from tonight, looks at how speculative fiction can imagine decolonialization and bring it into being. Her own fiction has been shortlisted for the British Science Fiction Association Awards and tries to support this project of creating better futures for us all. Her stories have appeared in Nature, Radon, and Little Blue Marble, among other venues. She co-hosts the podcast Griots and Galaxies on African speculative fiction. Follow her adventures at www.jennahanchey.com. Before we clap and turn it over to them, I just want to say I really love working with these two people. I really admire them both as scholars and as fiction writers, and it really makes me really happy to have them together. I think they do a lot of thinking together anyway. And Jenna's going to kind of talk to us from like kind of a theory, criticism side, and Tanvir is going to read a piece of fiction, but the roles could easily be reversed, and we'd have exactly as good of an evening. Really lucky to have them both. Please, clap from both, but also welcome Jenna Hanchey to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Matt, and the World Building Initiative for having us and giving us this space. As he mentioned, this talk comes from a chapter of my new book that I'm working on right now, Decolonial Dreamwork, African Futurism and Imagination Beyond Development, which basically is in long form looking at how dreaming beyond what the West has said is possible or is the world is imperative for us all to build better futures, and looking at how African imagination and epistemologies can do that, and advocates for if we're not listening to Africans, then we are not able to think outside of what colonialism has offered and build better futures together. So I am talking about the chapter on liquid resistance in the book, and in particular, I want to start with asking why I'm asking you to think liquidly. As populations across the world face rising authoritarian violence, not least the continuing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, even under an ostensible ceasefire, and the increasingly fascist governance in the US that aids and supports that genocide, in addition to our own police violence and ICE raids disappearing people to concentration camps without due process, there is an urgent need to learn means of resistance that can breach seemingly impenetrable walls of domination. I hope to demonstrate in this presentation that attuning to water and the way that it wears down solid structures can teach us ways of resisting power that are particularly useful in contemporary political contexts, where forces of power seem too solid sometimes to break. At the same time, things are also changing rapidly and cannot be linearly predicted. So fluidity can help us on both hands to find security and confidence in community rather than in solidity. So African and Black diasporic ways of knowing have long incorporated fluidity. But it can be hard to think and move like water after being trained in whatever way to think in solid ways of seeing the world. In particular, I'm pointing here towards Malidoma Patrice Somme's description in his book of Water and the Spirit, where he describes the disorientation of returning to his village in Burkina Faso after being kidnapped as a child and raised in a missionary boarding school. He reflects that the contrast is like that between liquid and solid. It seemed to me, he said, that Dagara knowledge was liquid in the sense that what I was learning was living and breathing and flexible and spontaneous. What I was learning made sense only in terms of relationship. It wasn't fixed, even when it appeared to be so. By contrast, I could see that Western knowledge I had been given had the nature of a solid, because it was wrapped in logical rhetoric to such a degree that it was stiff and inflexible. The learning one gets from a book, from the canons of the written tradition, is very different from the living, breathing knowledge that an elder has to offer, and different than the knowledge that comes from within. Dagara knowledge depends on relationship, and is therefore always shifting as those relationships do. But Western knowledge seems solid only by denying those relations. It seems solid, but you can't ever deny that we are in relation to place and people, and it makes it seem like knowledge need not change and transform over time and in relation to context. Whoopsie, that's the wrong arrow. In my first book, I write about how Tanzanian aid workers at a non-governmental organization use liquid agency to resist neocolonial imposition over the things that they're trying to achieve in their own village context. By constantly attuning to connections, instead of things assumed to last forever, such as when donors come in and want to build a building to put their name on it, when they're like, what we really need actually is money to pay the school teacher for a year. Things never last forever, actually. Instead, they look for emergent ways to challenge power, dependent on context and relationship. And so in doing so through liquid agency, I argue that it's a form of ambivalence that can use systems against themselves by paying attention to the ways that you can maneuver within them. And in doing so, it activates ruination. So it allows for alternative ways of thinking and being to emerge that sometimes can tear the structure down. So I'm looking at what water teaches us for combating what might seem like an overwhelming or an overbearing or an impenetrable or a solid thing that's always going to be there. How does water teach us that those things are flexible, movable, changeable, can be brought down? So water teaches us there's always a way through even the most solid-seeming structures. In her book, Theory of Water, Leanne Simpson reminds us that there's nothing on Earth that can hold against water given a long enough time scale. Even though structures of power often narrate themselves as universal or invincible, this is never truly the case. And it teaches us that a trickle may trace a new path, and as water continues to pass through that path, it wears away, eventually providing the opportunity to tear something down. Water teaches us that liquid action may not be noticed until it's too late. Joelle M. Cruz writes in a recent essay that Africans are often dismissed as lacking organization. She's an organizational communication scholar, and says that because of that, there's a downside, right, of epistemic injustice and not being taken seriously, and also power is often unable to register how liquid resistance is undermining its structures until they're about to fall because it doesn't see it as organized. Water teaches us we're in this together. If, as Shingai and Jerry Kagunda writes, colonial thinking is about severing relationships to each other, to our lands, to our hope, and to our futures, then one task of resistance is to depose of the hierarchies that have been used to separate us. As Alexis Pauline Gumbs reminds us, the world is round. Everything is connected, and everything returns. So in order to look at some liquid knowledges, I draw from two recent novellas. Sofia Samatar's recent science fiction novella, The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain, and Suyidevi Zokumboa's Lost Ark Dreaming, which I believe just won the Ignite Award this year. So in Sofia Samatar's science fiction novella, the story takes place on one ship within a far future spacefaring mining company, where strict hierarchies keep laborers chained in the hold and separated from those in the upper decks, who are themselves segmented into the ankleted, who must constantly wear leg monitors with blue lights tracking their every movement, and free persons with phones. When the character only named as the boy is pulled from the hold by character only named as the woman, a professor in a tenuous position at the university who manages to get the boy a scholarship, he must figure out how to maintain his connection to self and people through the practice, which is what he learned from the prophet before being pulled from the hold. Lost Ark Dreaming by Suyidevi Zokumboa takes place in the last standing of 5 skyscraping towers on the coast of Lagos. We enter the world 54 years after a catastrophic flood, and only one tower has remained against the rising sea. The others have long ago succumbed. Named the Pinnacle, the tower is separated into levels, the uppers, midders, and lowers, with the lowers lying underwater. Yakini, a midder, is sent to investigate a strange leak in the lowers, joined by Ngozi, an upper administrator, and Tuoyo, an engineer from the lowers. So, as Suyidevi Zokumboa puts it in one character, the grandmother of Yakini, water no good enemy, not because water like everybody and everybody like water, no, but because if water decide to mean you, nobody fit fight 'em. So we are looking at the ways that water can take down even the harshest seeming structures by these liquid resistance strategies, seeping through the cracks in the structure, gathering together in a wave, and starting where you are. So solid structures, whether physical constructions or the rigidity of belief systems, keep people from seeing wider relational possibilities that are open to them. The solid walls of the pinnacle hold back more than the ocean. They also keep out the undersea dwellers known as Yamoja's children, though who the children are or what they are is unclear. Some people thought of them as magma-spitting demons, complete with tentacles and horns. Some thought of them as shape-shifting ancient warriors with shark-like teeth. What is agreed upon is that they are monstrous and therefore dangerous. Yakini just recalls them described, in the words of the master clerics, as offsprings of the devils beneath the sea. So when our 3 main characters come in contact with one, imagine their surprise when the child gives their name as Omiwale. The water comes home. And they did. The child sprung a leak in the side of the pinnacle's walls in order to deliver news and stories and connections that could bring the people together. And as soon as that connection is made, the solid walls dividing, all of them, start to become less sound. The more the 3 main characters begin to think liquidly, the less willing they are to accept these solid divisions. In fact, they realize that following the flows of relation across difference is actually imperative for their survival. At one point, Ngozi questions Tuoyo about why the leak is of such concern at all to her. I'm still struggling to see how that's critical. It's just leakage, right? It wasn't a bad question, not from a non-engineer at least, but she found herself swallowing a scoff at just leakage, this man and his justs. We have a saying down here, every leak is death, she replied. Maybe for you up there, a leak only means a failure at plumbing. But down here, an unattended leak could easily mean a structural failure. A leak here is bad for all of us. She leaned in, hoping to drive her message home. All of us. Later, Tuoyo thinks to herself, didn't they know that if the lowers crumbled, the whole tower would follow? To keep their power, the uppers are willing to not only ignore the leak, but seal off and flood the entire level and everyone in it. The harder and more violently the structure works to maintain itself, the less stable it actually becomes. In the practice, the horizon and the chain, the person who slips through the cracks is not someone trying to get in, but someone who's been pulled out. But the boy did not ask to come upstairs. He finds himself violently torn from everything he's ever known without warning or explanation. He may have been released from a torturous existence, chained at the ankle, guarded while doing manual labor, but it was done against his consent and in a way that severed him from community. When the boy's chain is removed, he's marked instead with the surveillance device of the ship's middle class, a blue-lit anklet. When the boy arrives and has the anklet placed on him, the woman knows immediately, even before meeting him. She's sitting at the time with an upper-class colleague, one of the people who was allowed to use a phone, who informs her of the boy's arrival. But she did not need him to tell her because she already knew that the boy was here, from the feel of her anklet, the slight twinge that meant a new link had been connected. She never spoke to him of the anklet, nor did he ask about it. The woman can sense people through these anklets, these things that are meant to be surveillance devices, which she teaches the boy to do as well. But her upper-class colleague never even considers the anklets could be anything more than a tool of domination and control. The boy, on the other hand, because of his knowledge that he brings with him of the practice, a means of connecting that he was taught by the Prophet, is able to push the connections enabled by the anklets even further. He tried to tie himself to his body to ground himself in the grating edge of sound as he cleared his throat, and he felt in the sweat of his hairline, an anklet above all, that tenuous link, and he felt the professor in another room. She was making a speech, and she was afraid. He saw her upraised hand. I can almost hear her voice, he thought, startled, and then he did hear it. The anklets are meant as a form of control, just as the chain is, but both also provide a means of intimacy and connection, when used in fluid ways against the seemingly impenetrable or inescapable purpose that they were made for. So, importantly, liquid resistance is not about individuality. It's not about heroes. It's not about relying on structures that are already in existence. It's about forming intimacies that can create new structures through our relations. In Lost Ark Dreaming, this becomes apparent very quickly after reporting the child to the upper leadership results in suspicious instructions. They're told not to evacuate the flooding. Don't worry, help is on the way. And instead, they watch as the police quickly disappear, leaving the residents of Level 9 alone as a sluice gate opens, pouring water in on them. Emergency lights illuminate the floor, pointing towards what should be safety, but Tuolio realizes the lines would lead them to their death. They can't rely on the structure. They have to rely on each other. And yet Ngozi, as a low-level uppers administrator, has the hardest time divesting from the hierarchy. Even as his bosses are trying to drown him, he still resists using his administrative privileges to override the trash compactor that they need to shut off to escape the level. He says that it would be the end of my life, of everything that I've worked for. Not doing that would be the end of your life, Yakini said. What the fuck are you even looking around? Your bosses are going to drown us. They know we're down here, they know you are down here, and they're going to do it anyway. You don't know that, Ngozi said. They might have taken control because they're trying to fix it. We should just wait until we know what they're doing instead of making rash decisions like this. What if they are? And this is when Tuolio tells him to shut up. There's something comforting in solidity, to the point that we rely on it even when everything around us shows us that we would be better off trusting the people that we've always been told we can't trust for whatever reason, that those are the ones that are different than us. There's no need in solidity to make a decision for yourself because you're already told you have a rule book to follow, instructions that tell you what to do, lines on the floor that are supposed to lead you to safety. Acting fluidly in the moment requires you to take on the responsibility, not as a savior or a hero, but as part of a relational network. Eventually, even Ngozi learns to think liquidly as well. As he and Tuolio basically barely escape Level 9 with their lives, only to come face to face with yet another level that had previously been flooded by the uppers, he reflects over a single sandal he spies there, floating in a pile of flotsam. He thought of how useless the sandal was without the other in its pair, and how much in this tower and beyond was the same, dependent on other people to be effective, dependent on other people and things for their very existence to be effective and meaningful, useless in their absence. The uppers are hampered by their own individualism. By killing everyone on level 9 in order to maintain hierarchical order and re-solidify structures of belief that say that there shouldn't be children. Don't worry, the children are monsters out there. They don't come in here. They undermine their own ability to survive. They make their own system less stable through their very efforts to hold it together. In Samatar's work, this interconnection comes through in the practice, which the boy learns from the prophet in the hold. The practice is a means of attending to intimacies. It's described as linkages extending in all directions. It is the mesh, entanglement. It is the bond, the chain that grows in all directions, for the chain of being is not up and down. The practice is about continually tuning into the multiplicity of connections that surround us, but importantly, non-hierarchically. In the practice, the prophet instructs that to gaze on it was to look neither up nor down. Look out, he said, pointing a finger. He put his hands to his ribs. He said the breath expanded the body in all directions. Looking up or down reifies existing structures. The practice asks us to look out, to form new links. There's no hierarchy in water. By attending to intimacies, the practice offers a means of liquid resistance. It's referred to also as the search for the river that is also a sea. At the end of the novella, the boy realizes one person is a river. Everyone is a sea. A river can only move in semi-constrained directions, but by connecting with the other waters around us, we together form something multi-directional, powerful, and collective width, breadth, and depth. The prophet explains the potential of the practice through a game that the hold children play. When you play scatter, when it's really good, it's because you all move as one, as if one knows where the ball will fall because the other kicks it. And how does the one know? It's because they've played together, felt and thought of each other in movement and stillness. It's the practice. Intimate attunement to those around you, practice engaging with them, understanding of how you move together and what that might do allows for surprising abilities to form only in community, together. When we recognize how widely injustice stretches, though, responding to it in a meaningful way can feel like an overwhelming task. But if we're all connected, rivers in a larger sea, then we are never alone. And when you look out instead of up or down, the prophet reminds us, if the horizon is everywhere, then there is no wrong place to begin. The boy struggles with the overwhelming violence once he begins to be able to stretch out with the practice and see the webs that connect not only across the ship he occupies, but multiple other ships in space across their histories and into their futures. He describes a mesh so dense he could barely see, making it impossible to know what exactly his actions would catalyze. He knows that he must act, but is overwhelmed with the possibilities for where to start. Eventually, he realizes he can start anywhere. He just needs to start. Start with one, he thought. He would start with the living. He would begin with the child. And as if in response to his resolution, the great web tensed and quivered, and he knew. He knew exactly where she was. Deterministic structures, power may feel overwhelming, but our task is not to determine everything. Our task is to start where we are. Yakini dreams of a wave. A basket that she clutches tightly in her hands as the waters rise around her, overwhelming her. Something she can hold on to, she can control. When the others put themselves in harm's way so that Yakini can make it to the Pinnacle's control room and share the stories that the child had risked their life to deliver, she finds her hands are now empty. Right before the containment glass finally shattered under the force of the police's attack, Yakini believed she saw something in the cameras. Something began to appear across every form of media, taking over her workstation, commandeering. She would never know, because the sea of red about her rose without warning and enveloped her. The images on her workstation drifted away like an arc, floating off with all the answers. But she feared not where it would go, because her heart had found rest. For when she looked down in her hand, there was no basket in it. At the end, perhaps at her end, Yakini demonstrates to us that creating better futures for everyone is not and cannot be dependent upon one person's perceived control over what they're creating. Will the actions of Yakini and the boy change their worlds? We don't fully know. because we don't know the fullness of the wave of which they're a part, and neither do they. But we don't need to know. Liquid resistance is not about gaining control over futures. It's not about the individual, it's beyond them. One person is a river, the boy tells us. Everyone is a sea. And no river can know the fullness of the sea. The novellas must leave us here, because the point is not about what each of these characters is able to produce on their own. Their waves will join others to form a flood. It is not the boy, it is not the woman, it is not the prophet, it is not the child. It is the mesh. Entanglement, vibration, brightness, scent. It is what binds. It is the knowledge that does not divide itself. It is the bond, the chain that grows in all directions, for the chain of being is not up and down. It is the child. It is the prophet. It is the woman. It is the boy. Liquid resistance is each of us, and it is all of us. Because it doesn't depend on any one individual, it depends on what we create together. And yet, in that, it does depend on us doing what we can, where we are, and trusting those we build intimacies with to do so as well. Liquid resistance is a wave, ever rising, and given a long enough time scale, nothing can stand against water. This is in part based on these two essays, if you're interested in reading a little more. Thank you.
You can, for sure, you can press once. Yeah, I'll go here for a minute. I'm going to take a minute to open this.
Yeah. Let's get a little rest from Jenna.
You're fine. See, Jenna, I don't want to talk after having seen your presentation. That was brilliant. That was brilliant. No. It's no. It's.
We could trade next
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, that's a good place to start. Anyway, thank you to Matt for the very generous invite, for the very generous introduction, to Jenna for such a brilliant conversation starter, for a brilliant presentation to think with. And, you know, I know we're writers who are supposed to have something new to say relatively constantly, but my tongue is not going to get tired of always kind of talking about you two in particular and what it's like to share some space with both of you. It's not just because it's great to be in the company of such excellent writers and excellent theorists and having these kinds of conversations, getting to that work, but also just to be with people of such clarity and sincerity and good character, especially in these times, but always speaking. So I'm really grateful to that. I'm very grateful to the Humanities Institute, to World Building for putting all of this together, for the hard work in setting this all up. Thank you guys very much. And my thanks to all of you here tonight and across the ether for taking the time and spending a little bit of time with us this evening. So I'm here to read a story, titular story, Wilayat and Seven Saints. Right? It was published this October in the magazine Kaleidotrope. It's also available online to read for free at Kaleidotrope, and I'd also like to thank Fred Coppersmith, for the editor at Kaleidotrope, for taking on this particular story over a year ago now, at a time when we were deep in the middle of systemic efforts at silencing particular voices, right, which we still are, but he took on the stories. I'm very grateful for that. I'm not going to bore you too much with my voice, with just comments. I'll get to the story, but before I do, I just want to say that I don't like talking about what my stories mean, because I don't believe anything means anything inherently. Like, it's the nihilism comes through, right? I don't believe meaning is fixed, right? So I don't think it's right for me to be here and tell you what a thing means, but I can tell you what was on my mind when I was writing the story, which is the genocide in Gaza. This event is titled Resistance, right? And I think our reflexive habit in speculative fiction, perhaps especially, is to think about the word resistance as a good thing. And we kind of charge it with a positive moral valence, right? It's to give it that positive gloss. You know, resistance is biting our thumbs at bullies. It's shaking our fists in the general direction of the big bad. We love underdogs, right? It's very American. But as with all things, resistance doesn't inherently mean anything. Resistance, if we think about it, for example, in physics terms, it just means opposition to the force of flow, right? So how hard it is for some force to pass through some barrier. And this evening, and for this story, the resistance that concerns me, as it concerns me for so much, is institutional resistance to Palestinian life and Palestinian dignity. I think we can measure resistance in the silence that many storytellers have had on Palestine, present company very much excluded. And in the silencing of Palestinian voices in particular, I think we can measure resistance in the Olympic level gymnastics that our news writers and our journalists and others engage in when they break the rules of the English language to wield the passive voice with such brutality so that Palestinians can mysteriously be killed without any murderers. And I think we can measure resistance in the way that pundits will publicly wonder whether children starving to death before our eyes might have pre-existing medical conditions. I think we have become very good at resisting Palestinians' right to live, at resisting Palestinians' right to live with dignity, and at resisting Palestinians' right to live in their homes. We've become very good at resisting Palestinian life while wearing clothes spun in Chinese concentration camps where the Uyghur genocide is still taking place, while wielding devices that are dependent on minerals from the DRC as our weapons poison unborn Afghan children past the end of 20 years of occupation with no reckoning or recompense. Our daily amnesia of past cruelties, I cannot stress this enough, our daily amnesia of those past cruelties is the critical fuel supply for future crimes. We resist our own reckoning, and the longer that we resist it, the heavier the weight of the dead in our shadows. I wrote this story trying to give in to that weight, and as I read it tonight, I ask that you try to do so as well. This is an early modern miniature of the construction of a garden in Kabul called Bagh Babur. It has nothing and everything to do with this story. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Number 1, Hassan Afghan. Listen, hear now the account of that mighty dervish, that dear friend of God, that crocodile gliding through the sea of divine unity, Hassan Afghan. Once, while Hassan Afghan was passing through a town in the shadow of the northern mountains, he came to a mosque. The muazzin gave the call to prayer, the imam stepped up, and the congregants assembled. Hassan Afghan was there in the first row, looking at the imam's back. In the sight of the unlettered, the imam was merely going about the normal bows and prostrations of prayer. Yet Hassan Afghan's eye of certainty perceived otherwise. Even as the imam's lips moved through the sweet speech of revelation, his thoughts were circumambulating news of the prince's fresh conquest of some rebel villages. The men had been slain, the storehouses pillaged, the young women put in fetters. The imam was already counting out how many mohors he could spare on buying a new girl at the bazaar when the prince came back with the spoils. Hassan Afghan was stepping forward even as the imam was reciting the final salutations, seizing the man by the beard and slapping him. What the hell kind of prayer is this when the likes of you lead us in it? Bibi Mubarakah raised the cup to her lips, hiding a joyless smile. We were being taken through the sands of the Registan at the time, chains around our feet, heads bare to the sun. I could still smell the smoke of home burning. At the same moment Hassan Afghan struck the imam, the wind howled up at our feet into a sandstorm, wrapping the sun in a veil of dust. The soldiers on their horses were shouting and wheeling, grabbing at us, protecting their goods. I knew it was the only chance I was going to get, so before the horsemen could get us into line, I bolted into the desert. The sounds of the coffee house were coming back to me after her telling. The afternoon shadows were deep under the awning, the sunlight glossy on the near wall of Hassan Afghan's tomb. The samovar was running hot, steam laced with the scent of saffron and cardamom, but for a moment I could have sworn I smelled smoke. The prince's conquest was many years ago, I said. A lifetime, in truth, too deep in the past for the young woman before me to have seen it, but it would have been rude to say so. Was it? Bibi Mubarakah said, almost to herself. Certainly doesn't feel that way. Forgive me, I said. Pashto is not my strongest language. Do you mean it was one of your ancestors who was taken captive during the campaign? You heard me, Bibi Mubarakah cocked her head. What kind of historian comes to write a shrine guide for the saints of Wilayat and doesn't have good Pashto? I gave her a sheepish look. The vizier wanted to present the king with a gift for his son's circumcision. He has people cataloging the saints of every country in the kingdom to assemble a chronicle of holy sites. I just happen to be the one he sent here. You've come to ask questions, Bibi Mubarakah said. But that's not how the tombs of saints work. Every pilgrim knows that you come to have questions asked of you. I had talked to many pilgrims along the way, gathering legends for the wazir's book. But this was the first I was hearing of such sentiment. There was something about the way she said it, the angle at which her eyes caught the dying light, a watchfulness, like a sparrow looking at a worm in the shadow of its wings. I raised my own cup, as if it were a veil. Number 2, Bul Shinwari. The memorialists of sweet speech relate that in ancient times, long ago, before the children of Adam flourished across the 7 climes, the world was full of giants. The greatest warrior among them was Bul Shinwari, who roamed the mountain passes even after the winter snows clogged them, battling any human fool enough to challenge her and feasting on their hearts. So unstoppable was Bul Shinwari that the kings of men cried out with one voice, seeking the greatest warrior of their time and any time. So it was that Hazrat Ali, the Lion of God, rode forth against Bul Shinwari. Their battle cries were thunder rolling out over the distance covered by 20 days. The clash of their swords was lightning snapping across the black sky. As Bul Shinwari's blade rose, Hazrat Ali slipped under her and grabbed her by her waistband, hauling her up over his head. Try as she might, she could not get free. It is said that this is the moment when Bul Shinwari fell in love with Hazrat Ali. When news of their marriage reached the ears of men and giants alike, all of them balked. Such a union was not to be tolerated. The kings of men sent missives out to Hazrat Ali's foes, fearing to face him themselves. Those enemies fell upon the Lion of God in a sudden raid, chasing him from Wilayat, even as he was settling down to enjoy a melon. As for Bul Shinwari, she was cast out of her tribe, exiled from her beloved mountaintops for the desert. This alone saved her when the armies of humankind reached her people and put them to the sword. When the news at last came to Bul Shinwari, alone in her haunts, her tears cut a groove in the foothills of the Registan, on the banks of which our golden Qayamat flowers still bloom. Bibi Mubarakah handed me the Qayamat blossom, one of the season's last. There were only a handful left beside the withered canal where we stood. I found Bul Shinwari after 3 days and 3 nights, she said. Or rather, she found me. She took me back to her cave, nursed me back to health on sheep's milk and golden grapes. Ever since her marriage to Hazrat Ali, she had sworn off human and animal meat alike, though she did seem to enjoy telling war stories from the beginning of her life, when she used to fight the children of Adam. We were interlopers to her, trespassers on ground that had been stewarded by her people for longer than humanity has existed. Even so, between her and Hazrat Ali, there could have been a better world between us all. I was still surprised to have run into Bibi Mubarakah again. I had not told her where I was headed after Hassan Afghan's tomb. I had not known myself. The chances of finding her once more had been next to impossible. Yet here we were, together on the banks of the canal, carved from Bul Shinwari's sorrows. I heard this canal was cut from Bulshanwari's blood, I said, after Hazrat Ali spilled it in battle. After he defeated her, he turned her corpse to stone, forming the foothills where we stand right now. A lie, Bibi Mubarakah said. Because Bulshanwari is alive, I said slowly, and you got the story from her. More than the story. Bibi Mubarakah pushed up the robe of her sleeve, showing me the ancient peshkhabs lashed to her forearm, the blade curving up towards her elbow. I was startled. None of the other pilgrims even seemed to notice her, much less the dagger. She gave me this weapon, Bibi Mubarakah said, filled my saddlebag, set me on the road to the prince's city. And what is it you were planning to do once you got there? I said. Bibi Mubarakah smiled. Number 3, Arif Tareen. Such is the story of that Malang who wandered the 7 climes, that God-drunk pigeon who soared through the skies of love, Arif Tareen. It is said that Arif Tareen used to dwell on the banks of the Tarnak, chanting the names of God under his breath, living off grass and leaves. 17 years passed in this manner until even his neck had turned green. One day, Arif Tareen was patching his robe as a bridal procession passed, a cedarwood palanquin borne aloft at his heart. A needle of divine inspiration stitched itself into Arif Tareen's chest, and he trailed after the band. As the procession passed through the city gates, under the hollow eyes of dead rebels' piked heads, Arif Tareen darted forward and snatched the bride from within her litter. Before her relatives could stop him, he had disappeared with the girl down an alleyway. The alert went off. The soldiers dashed through the streets like hunting dogs. When they found Arif Tareen, the bride was nowhere to be seen. Enraged at the breach of peace, the prince at once ordered the executioner to come. The leather mat was unrolled, the curving blade hefted. Arif Tareen was put on his knees, still humming his devotions. When the blade came down, it shattered into 99 pieces on the back of the Malang's neck, and each of the shards caught the full force of the midday sun. For one glorious heartbeat, the prince's city was filled with nothing but light. I hadn't been in the city for a day before I ran into Arif Tareen, dragging that girl with him, Bibi Mubarakah said. Before I could say anything, he put her hand in mine and said, "Go quickly. She doesn't want this marriage, and they're close behind." Was it true? Before me, an elderly pilgrim got up from beside the nest of flags, marking Arif Tareen's grave. In her hands was a round of naan folded about cooling halwa. The pilgrim broke off half the offering and gave some over to me as she left. I broke it in turn, handing a part to Bibi Mubarakah. It was, Bibi Mubarakah confirmed. The bride was there for one of the prince's captains. A marriage meant to let her lands fall into the prince's grasp without struggle. She knew what they wanted from her, didn't want to give it. They were going to take it anyway. I'm sure they found another way, I said. They did, Bibi Mubarakah said. Eventually, but not through her. So what became of the bride? We fled. There was a riot when the sword broke against Arif Tareen's neck. And in the chaos, the bride and I slipped out of the gate. She knew a place in the mountains where we could take refuge. And your own plans, I said? She was very beautiful, Bibi Mubarakah murmured. Of course, I said. Have you never been driven from your road by love? She asked. I looked away. I've seen what happens to those who are. Is it so terrible a fate? For the children left orphaned by mothers and fathers driven to martyrdom? Yes. I spoke before even considering the words. Your rage is better suited for the hands wielding the swords, not the necks under them, Bibi Mubarakah said. The rage of the grass doesn't matter against the rhinoceros trampling it, I said. Even the grass might cut the rhino's foot and bring it down, Bibi Mubarakah replied. I pushed her words away. What did a child's anger matter, weighed against what I had achieved, what I was meant to achieve? What did it matter when the past's shadows might be banished by the glare of a bright future, one even brighter than the day Arif Tareen knelt before the executioner? Number 4, Khizr Sarban. Listen to the tale of that powerful faqir. that abundant wellspring of divine mercies, that jewel dangling from the ear of existence, Khizr Sarban. Of all the miracles wrought by this greatest of saints, few surpass what he has done since his death. Every autumn the nomads gather at the grave of Khizr Sarban to elect their winter caravans Khan, who will lead them across the mountains and into the countries of Hindustan. The cooks prepare a barley porridge out of the iron pot at the foot of Khizr Sarban's grave, ladling its contents into hundreds of waiting bowls. Despite the crowds, never once has the pot of Khizr Sarban run empty. In the ages since Khizr Sarban was buried under his plain hilltop dome, many wealthy men have attempted to erect forts and mosques and caravansarais in its vicinity. But no sooner does one rise than it is consumed by an earthquake, or a rainstorm, or a ravaging swarm of flies. This is a marvelous example for those who would consider it. I stared at the shattered dome where Khizr Sarban had once rested. I can't take this story. You can't, Bibi Mubarakah said, or won't? Khizr Sarban was a symbol for the rebels, I said. They would gather at his grave with the nomads, plotting to overthrow the dynasty. That's why the prince came with his soldiers, Bibi Mubarakah said. I remember the day. They dug him up and set fire to his bones. Then they set fire to everything else. I pressed my lips together. I had not crawled out from under the weight of my father's treason to destroy myself now. How he would have loved to hear the story of Khizr Sarban. How my mother would have loved to sing litanies in praise of the rebel saint. But they were gone, and I was still here, crawling up towards some position at court where I might do some good, where I might at last be safe. Bibi Mubarakah put a hand to the blackened wall. That was the second time the prince burned my life down. I swore on Khizr Sarban's memory there wouldn't be a third. How could you expect to stop it, I said. What could you possibly do alone? But I wasn't alone, Bibi Mubarakah said. I had all the saints of wilayat, fables of dead men. Bibi Mubarakah laughed. Is that what you think? If they had any power at all, I said, don't you think Khizr Sarban's shrine wouldn't have burned? Spoken like a historian, she said. Every day, pilgrims come to press their brows against the holy dust at these graves. Every day, the stories of wilayat saints rest on the lips of new devotees. Every day, the memory of their power and the dynasty's impotence nests in the hearts of this country's women and men, waiting, waxing. And one day, that blessed memory will flood the bodies of the faithful and sweep corruption away. Truth will come and falsehood will perish. Falsehood shall always perish. The rebellion is dead, I snapped. Yes, Bibi Mubarakah said, but much like the dead, it has not come to an end. Number 5, Ashob. Among the host of Khizr Sarban's companions, none were so dear to him as his dog, Ashob. It is said that once, a mullah came to visit Khizr Sarban and was shocked to find the saint wrestling in play with the great hound. At once he launched into a harangue about unclean beasts and ritual impurity and the fallen standards of darweshes in our day. When he was done, the mullah retired to his own home. The next day, the king's secretary came by with the mullah's salary, drawn from the royal treasury. But whenever the mullah tried to touch the coins, the mohurs and rupiahs would sear his fingers. When his hands had been reduced to a blistering mess, the mullah sought out Khizr Sarban once more. He found the saint sitting in the mosque, Ashob curled at his feet. When the mullah presented his petition, Khizr Sarban raised his eyes and told him there was nothing to be done. For if the mullah was so concerned with unclean and ritually impure things, the king's money would never be lawful to him. There was an old gold collar around Ashob's neck, etched with words in Mongolian script. In another time, he had belonged to a mighty emperor who one day issued orders to exterminate an entire village. In that moment, the prayer of our beloved Muhammad, peace be upon him, O God, may a dog from among your dogs overcome him, reached out from across the centuries and gripped Ashob's teeth. Ashob sprang up from the base of the throne to tear out the emperor's throat, and amidst all the hue and cry after, he padded through the door out into the desert. The air itself trembled with the wazir's rage. One moment he was screaming about how I dared put a dog into a list of saints. The next he was thundering on about the mention of the accursed Khizr Sarban. This, he said, was not what he had sent me to do. How dare I waste the time and money of the royal court? How dare I make the wazir look like a fool for having looked past the flaws in my bloodline? That night I returned to the cattle track outside the city, along which Ashob's small grave lay. The wazir's threat still rang in my ears. This was my last chance. If I did not submit an appropriate chronicle, I would be lucky to avoid the prison under the palace grounds. I met him, Bibi Mubarakah said. I had not noticed her appear, had long since stopped wondering how she did. After the dome burned, 7 days and nights I followed the prince across the desert, him and his men, until there was no strength in my limbs and I could drive myself no further. On the 7th night I fell to the sand and resigned myself to the hereafter. Imagine my surprise when I felt water trickling into my mouth. When I could open my eyes, I saw it was a dog who had carried the water to me in his mouth. The collar around his neck was ancient gold, full of strange writing. That's more mercy than there is left in this entire kingdom, I said. Mercy is everywhere in Wilayat, Bibi Mubarakah said. Maybe you're looking in the wrong places. I can't, I said. I can't look elsewhere. If I do, you'll see what I saw, Bibi Mubarakah said. What my people saw, what your people saw. You'll see what we might be in a world without kings. You don't want to see, but that won't stop them from putting you down like they do giants and malangs and dogs. What am I supposed to do? I whispered. In the moonlight, she took my hand. My fingers in hers were like a scrap of cotton being embraced by tongues of fire. What you've been doing, Bibi Mubarakah said. Listen. Number 6, Shahab Bakhtiar. Know the true story of that gentlest ascetic, that Pole holding up the tent of reality, Shahab Bakhtiar. They say that Shahab Bakhtiar was walking with his companions in the tracts of Atghar when he saw a soldier lashing his horse to urge it on faster. Yet no matter how hard the soldier beat his mount, no wounds appeared on its flanks. Shahab Bakhtiar watched them go, weeping quietly. Only later did his companions notice the blood seeping through his robes, the ribbons of cut flesh across his back. It so happened that Shahab Bakhtiar was one day arrested by the governor of his province on suspicion of giving refuge to criminals. That night, as the saint languished beneath the palace, the monsoon clouds scudded the night sky, even though the dry winds of winter had already come. Spears of lightning stabbed down into the governor's stables and mansions. Even the pillars of his audience hall were left like so much chewed straw. They say the only one who walked from that ruin was a quiet darwesh with long scars down his back. There was a lightning storm the night I finally caught up to the prince's camp, Bibi Mubarakah said. Monsoon clouds, even though the dry winds of winter had already come. A bolt struck each enclosure in the camp, and every man's horse bolted, trampling the cook fires and tents. I walked through the mess of it, going straight to the royal pavilion. The guards were distracted with the horses. They didn't see me take out my peshkabs, slice a line in the back of the panels. There he was, the Prince of Wilayat, surrounded by his trophies and tapestries and curling lattice screens. Even in private, he needed to be shielded from the world. They didn't help him in the end. They didn't keep me from closing to an arm's length. He didn't notice me until I was already on top of him, no more than I noticed the sword coming out of its sheath, sinking into my stomach, even as my blade carved a red spray through his neck. Number 7, Bibi Mubarakah. Once, many years ago, the Prince of Wilayat rode with his army to a string of villages and burned them. Out of the ruin, he brought some booty, ripped from their treasuries, and strings of women in chains, led like brood mares across the desert. One of those women slipped his grasp, and after some time, tracked the prince down a day's march from his city, where she struck him dead. The prince's corpse had been borne on a bier back to the fort. In response, 7 armies sallied from the city gates and wreaked havoc on Wilayat. 7 rebellions flared to life against their cruelty. 7 decades passed before the last brambles of sedition were swept from the courtyard of the kingdom, establishing this present state which only kings could ever call peace. Of the woman's fate, nothing was ever said until now. Under the firmament, and under a waning moon, I rode out to the site of the prince's camp, marked by a lonely shagh tree. I took out an adze and dug around the trunk. Half the night passed before I unearthed the grave. Her bones were wrapped in the same mantle in which she had appeared to me. The roots had grown around and through them, as if cupping her in a protective hold. Lashed to her forearm was a rusty peshkabs. Cutting boughs from the shagh, I kindled a fire and took out the wazir's chronicle. I fed every page of it to the fire, save those holding Bibi Mubaraka's story, scrawled in the margins. One day, when the kings of this dynasty are but a half-remembered fable, someone will write the tale of this country's spiritual masters in full. For now, there is only one saint in Wilayat. With these words, I tie the blade of Bibi Mubaraka to my forearm, pour the earth back over her bones, fold these pages under my robe and above my heart. Listen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you both so much. So great. Also, you both have such lovely presenting reading voices. I feel like I could have listened to both of you for a long time. It's good. Thank you so much. It's nice to be in the grip of it at the end of a long day, you know? I'm just going to ask a question or two and then open it up to other people. So I don't want to take more time than I already have. I do want to think a little bit more about what Jenna sort of introduced about liquid resistance and the idea of being not an individual, part of a community, and the way we move together, even if you don't know the people you're moving with, which I think is a big part of your story. I think one of my own sort of maybe personal failures, and certainly a failure as a novelist, where I write these characters who are like by themselves and moving through a landscape, feeling an emotion, and I'm just like, and I keep like book after book being like, oh, this person needs to be in a community, this person needs to be part of a movement, this person, you know, I can feel that individualism that I think you're both sort of writing against, I guess, you know, in different ways is really deep-seated in me. And I think I know that the helplessness that I sometimes feel in the face of the world, I can hear Jack Gilbert had like the relentless furnace of the world, is because I'm trying to always take it on individually, right? And I wondered if you could both just maybe talk about, you came to sort of this idea of sort of liquid resistance and that way of moving as a river among the sea, you know, or, you know, sort of some of the thinking you're thinking about, even like the idea of being a pilgrim or like moving with the saints or moving with other people along the same paths. How did you maybe get to these ideas? And then also like, how are you sort of carrying them in like yourself as, you know, not just in the scholarship or in the fiction? Easy. We'll just bare our whole souls real quick.
I'm not trained in that. I came to studying speculative fiction out of, am I off? Oh no, did I do it on accident? There you go. Oh, hello, sorry. I turned myself off apparently on accident. Maybe I will not put it back in my pocket. Okay, well, I really was just fumbling over words and not saying anything before the mic got turned on, so that's good. Before I was saying, I guess, that I'm not a trained scholar of literature. I came to studying speculative fiction through studying first critical development studies and doing ethnographic, well, I started out as a physics major, and then I joined the Peace Corps and was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tanzania for 2.5 years and taught physics in a high school and noticed volunteers coming and going, and also was like in teaching physics, something I was trained to do in a high school. where they didn't have a physics teacher otherwise, but also we were pushed to do things like women's empowerment work and HIV/AIDS education. And at first I was like, yes, of course, who doesn't want to empower women and, you know, prevent people from getting a disease? But I was like, wait a second, I'm a physics major. Like, I've never had public health training. I have zero understanding of what it means to be an empowered woman in this village context. Like, why is it that I am just being given these opportunities and money to do these things? Because it was the years of PEPFAR when that was available, when I don't actually have any skills to do this other than just being like a white American person, which was viewed as enough. And I was like, something about this is really fucked up and I don't really know how to articulate it, so I'll go to grad school. I was like, this is a communication problem, I think. So I just offhand applied to a master's degree in communication, and then was starting to, I thought I was gonna end up in nonprofit work, and then I was like, oh, let's learn about colonialism and neocolonialism and what that looks like in aid. And I am going on far too long of a tangent to say that a lot of this was coming out of like, the reason that I joined the Peace Corps in the back of my mind was like, well, there was a lot of stuff going on. But one of them was a sort of like white savior, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go save the world. I'm gonna go do something, which was quickly met with not understanding context, not understanding community, and that you can't do anything by yourself without those things. And so then, since then, it's been a trajectory of like, how does neocolonialism operate to train people that they should be able to do those things? And then how do we prevent and resist that? And then I got real tired of just yelling about white supremacy and neocolonialism, and was like, okay, how are Africans imagining their own futures in ways that are like outside of these logics entirely, resisting them perhaps, using different ways of viewing the world, and then putting these things in conversation so that, because I think that also part of the problem with that, with folks being trained in colonial thinking here, particularly white folks, is that they are unable to recognize other worlds that exist already. And so what I'm trying to do now is then bridge that. Because I don't think that we can build better worlds until we can understand the worlds that are already in operation around us and that we can partner with. So
Yeah,
that
really,
was too long.
No,
Sorry.
it wasn't at all. No, actually a really nice for students in the audience and stuff, especially like how you go from like your initial studies, your initial wants through that. I think it's really nice. I love that point about like you can't imagine the world until you understand the worlds that already exist. That seems true. Absolutely.
Jenna, you always make me very thoughtful. Now I want to like
Think.
yeah, no, like there's so much about what you said that I think it's so good to hear that sort of brutally clear assessment of what the process is, right? Because you're speaking as well to the modalities in which, you know, one is not aware of them even as they go through it. Like you're constantly being forced to have to check this, and right, and unless that impetus kind of comes from somewhere outside of it, it's very hard to cultivate. Yeah, no, and there's a lot that I think we could talk about at length when it comes to similarities in that story. I think largely for me comes out of being a deeply peripheral cog in GWAT, but still a cog in GWAT for a good amount of time.
Explain what GWAT is for people who don't.
The so-called global war on terror, right? So, and exactly, precisely what it meant for folks to look at me as a sort of authorizing principle, as an individual, right? It's fine, we can do whatever. Ahmed is over here, like it's fine, right? Like, and that kind of, that fits into a particular cycle of vampiric development industries and toothless advocacy organizations that ultimately end up, you know, as they've ended up. But I think coming to something that I've actually spoken with both of you about before on different forums, about kind of picking off from the last time I was here with you, Matt, on method about that community, right? Like last time we were here, and Jenna, we talked about this too, right? Like there is this Persian prefix hum, and like it means with, right? Like you add it onto words in order to try to generate something with something, right? And I think one of the principles that comes out of that is the word amawaz. Amawaz literally means harmony, like it means with the same voice, and part of it is that for me, so much of narration, whether in academic work as a historian or as a fiction writer, all of this is the same thing to me, like functionally. There's a difference between how we are trained to think about these things vis-a-vis your own individual genius as an English producer, and then digging through my own sense of narration outside of English, right, in which one is never an individual, right? So I'll give you an example to try to like make this a bit more concrete. Right? I've been transcribing some of the oral archives in my family. Just hadn't listened to them in over a decade, and I had recorded them at a time when one of my aunts had fallen quite ill, and you know, there are stories from childhood that then one becomes desperate to find some way to fix them in there, right? And I noticed, like, as the way of the narration is actually two things that are quite distinct. One, even though it is one voice there, you can tell by literally the prefacing comments, like there's no such thing as a citation, so-and-so said. There's actually subtler shifts in syntax, right? Like, it is said. And like, there are things that are actually being done within there that if one is culturally fluent, then one understands, okay, this is actually a citation, right? And so another voice is kind of coming in, but it is all coming in through one person. And there are things that when I'm listening to these voices, I hear elders in my family who quite clearly were not even fully aware of what they are transmitting, but they have heard it. And then myself as a historian, I've actually gone, oh wait, no, I thought that this was really crazy when I first heard it, but no, there was a war of extermination, there was a forced settlement. Like, I found the opposite record, and that has been a really kind of interesting experience in that, like, okay, there is no narration without taking on the trust of these people who came 6 generations back before us. They said this thing, it is kind of here right now, it is still solid, and it is as if it happened yesterday, not as if it happened 6 generations past. Every story, including Bibi Mubarakah, those are all my riffs on stories that were told. Like, I didn't make them up, right? Like, there's bits of language on almost everything that I've done that it's not my language. These are things that come from, like, having either heard family archive or having gone through thousands of pages of Pashto and Persian and like kind of moving through this stuff that they kind of seep you in it. And I think that sort of marination and that sort of habit of narration, you know, this isn't a good theoretical language, but that is where like my idea of what community comes from.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, oh, thank you both. They're both so great. You know, you're writing here about pilgrims different ways. I've been writing about that and thinking about it for the last couple of years. And the way that that general research always makes me feel less alone. It makes me feel more attached to other people. It makes me feel this. And then that particular research or that particular enacting of doing a thing people have been doing for 1,000 years or longer, and that feeling yourself, just even like your body in motion or your mind in motion, be like, I'm on a track a lot of other people have gone on. And this sort of, I think you can do something alone and not feel lonely because of that. And that includes writing, right? Something you do by yourself. But that because you're in the research and you're with other people's stories, and it doesn't feel lonely to sit down and write. It feels connected. It's actually like maybe with the rest of my life, or maybe I feel more separate, you know, or made to feel separate. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I do want to open up to other people. I know it's sort of, we're already kind of over time, but I'd love to take a question or two from the audience if people have them. Yeah, please.
It is, and then she telling you that you are the one who has to listen and learn. I was thinking about, you know, how this idea of liquid resistance, it's like trickling down of history that on the one hand seems to have been silent, on the other hand the things that, and so the kind of the one-sided knowledge, is that right, that we have, on the other hand, this way of really losing so much that is there, and it's almost like the water that kind of goes to all these different directions, and we often do not see. Sometimes it's under the water, and we do not see until it just kind of, you see the growth without realizing, and because we have. So I was thinking, to what extent, actually fascinatingly, you were both kind of without, I don't know if you've been discussing before, but there was something really important about how the way we understand history, the way we understand government are such rigid structures and epistemological, and to what extent actually turning it upside down, not even upside down, like, kind of tearing it apart as those kind of structures may allow us to hear differently. So I just felt like, highlight, it's not a question, but highlight how I felt like those were really significantly important ways to think about it. Those of us who used to be these very kind of strong modernists when we were growing up, like thinking, we're going to go and tell these people what women's rights are, we're going to go and tell them, and not realizing, the particular conditions that, how we were like literally imposing what's right without saying what's going on, how these soft movements of the everyday were actually there that we could actually learn from and understand something very much more deeper than what we knew. So anyways, for me, it was just a very interesting conversation to one another, and so much more than what academia often kind of teaches us when we do these kind of different.
Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you. One of the things that you're making me think about is an indigenous theorist whose work I pull from a lot, Brian Burkhart, who writes that he has a book called, nope, not going to remember, Indigenizing Philosophy through something about indigenizing philosophy. Anyway, Brian Burkhart's book is great. But one of the things he talks about is how the way he sees the fundamental aspect of coloniality is in delocality. So this idea that anything can be pulled up from the relations of which it's a part, the local, like deeply connected to land, that where we are speaking from is a very specific relation to land, to the air that we are breathing, is that's what allows us to speak, and that if we're that what colonialism does is act as if things can be delocalized. That you can take one means of doing something and say, this is the best means, best practice. We're just going to export it over there, and it's all going to be great because this is the best universal thing. It doesn't work because it's cut off from land. So I think, I don't know, that's part of what I'm thinking about too in what you're saying, this locality.
I think to go along with what Jenna said, and thank you very much for the kind comment.
Yeah, thank you.
I think part of what you've noticed and what you've kind of aptly described about the structure and the way the water escapes it, it is because not only have we not discussed the thing, we have not, like,
Right.
we have exchanged work for a good amount of time, and we work together quite closely. We also did not plan any of this at all about like any of our comments tonight. And part of the reason why I think that concordance is there is because this is in breach of academic etiquette about being nice about different viewpoints, but it is because what we are saying is true. and there is that structure is a lie. It is built artificially, which means that there are gaps, and that is where truth actually kind of moves through it, right? And I think that is an incredibly important thing for us to collectively fix on in an age of genocide denial, where people look, I mean, there are myths about, oh no, we don't know what's going on in Gaza because we don't have journalists. We've had journalists from the beginning documenting every single step of what is going on in Gaza. And all of a sudden we talk about, no, like, there are no journalists in Gaza, so we don't know what's happening. So being able to recognize what is true and what is actually happening in front of us right now, like, that does kind of take on a different importance. And I think that's why, like, I appreciate your comment a great deal, because it identifies the fact that the actual canard is that history is written by the victors. It is not, right? Like, history is completely beyond the ability for people to capture it in that way. One has to actually dwell with the fact of how are we captured by it rather than us capturing it? Like that was part of the thing on my mind with pilgrimage. And I think this goes to something Matt was saying, right? The difference between conceptualizing the stuff and, I mean, the reason why I write so much about shrines and almost like everything that I've written is because I go on ziyarat a lot. Like it's actually going to the pilgrimages and going to shrines and kind of just being in those communities and seeing the fact that, you know, I have met people who remember things from before the first Soviet invasions of the 20th century, right? Like there are still living memories at these places that you will never find in a history book. And that is our responsibility. And I think that's
you find them through those intimacies.
You find them through other people.
Intimacies.
You cannot think yourself into this and you cannot read yourself into it.
Yeah.
Like you have to do it, right?
And also allowing for a different kind of truth. Because the problem is that on the one hand, we deny particular realities that are right there. On the other hand, we create a different kind of what is real, what is true. Is that right? So to listen and to observe the ways some things may not come to us as true, you know, that you couldn't be there. You couldn't be there in your own story, is that right?
Yeah.
And yet one is there because
Yes.
the being there has
Yes.
so many other ways that
Yes.
it's not even,
Yes.
you know, so I think those are exactly how we think about intimacy, but also really allowing yourself to see and be different in a different way,
Yes.
and a different mode of being. And I think both of you were kind of talking about that, and it's fascinating to really see how the possibility of listening and seeing something that seems to be not there and yet is there, and how people experience those things. It's something we often lose sight because we have everything for us. On the one hand, empiricism of what is there is denied. On the other hand, everything has to be rationally, kind of empirically, verifiable. And I think those are part of.
Yeah, the reason that my book is called Decolonial Dream Work too is because I'm actually pulling from dreams and from spiritualities, because they're so often written off as not rational, not true, not real. And what I start with talking about Sylvia Tamale, who is a Ugandan feminist thinker who once at a conference was asked by a US scholar what her book was on, and she said, decolonizing Africa. And the scholar responded, oh, so you're writing science fiction. And playfully, but in a way that was dismissive of that as a actual reality. And so part of breaking through those structures that are set up as true is also not allowing that to contain what can be thought of as real.
It also made me think when you were talking, you used the word intimacy, and I was thinking about how often we talk about like empathy, and that empathy is something you can do at a distance if you do it at all, and intimacy means you have to like move toward the ground reality, move toward actual people, and to have intimacy with, for instance, the people of Gaza is so different than having empathy with, you can have both together, but like intimacy is a different thing with different relationships and different responsibilities, where empathy does not require much of you. And I think intimacy requires a lot. And I really love that idea, I think both of you are moving toward intimacy in your work in different ways that helps us do it as well. And I really appreciate so much. We are out of time. I want to be sensitive to staff people and that we're keeping. I do think Jenna and Tanvir would be glad to talk to you if you'd like to come chat, grab a cookie, ask them questions. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks
thank
both
you.
of you, as always.
Thank you.
So good to be in thought with you.
Thank you for coming.